Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is absolutely lovely to see you tonight. My name is Clare Gough. I am director of Pitzhanger Manor, where you are. We're sitting in John Soane's kitchen garden. Wow, that's where you are. Absolutely thrilled to welcome you in person tonight, because tonight is a very special night. As I'm sure so many of you know, during lockdown, an amazing team of people, I can see several of them here tonight, set up this incredible organisation, the Luminaries, to celebrate those great country houses and historic houses that spread westwards from London and up the Thames. And they set it up during lockdown so that when we were all confined to our rooms, we could have amazing inspirational talks online and still visit these wonderful, wonderful country houses. Well, of course, the Luminaries still carries on, it still carries on online. But we thought now that we're out of COVID, it might be nice to actually get together in person and celebrate being able to get together and discuss together. So today is our first experiment in that, and I'm going to hand over in a moment to the truly fabulous Professor Judith Hawley, who has chaired almost every single one of those online talks brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you to all the lovely team at Pitzhanger. Some of them will have been showing you around this glorious, glorious space, and some of you maybe are from this neighbourhood, but I hope many of you will come back. Thank you to the Luminaries team, and thank you to you for being here. I feel as if we've got something of an online community. I don't ever see you when presenting the online talks, but I do recognise the names that come up in the Q&A sessions, and there's some amazing questions that people come up with, and also very often answers. So somebody asked, well, what cheese was it that Jane Austen liked? I don't know what cheese Jane Austen liked. So our first speaker is Dr. Emily Burns, and she's representing Marble Hill House, which has been with us from the very start of the foundation of the Luminaries, but she's relatively new to the role that she has there. She's curator of collections and interiors for the whole of West London for English heritage, and her property portfolio includes Marble Hill, Chiswick House and the Jewel Tower. She'll be speaking about Marble Hill House tonight, and is very well qualified to do so, having been an expert on art and collecting in England's country houses. Over to Emily.
Thank you, Julia. I'm wrestling with this microphone. I know some of you can't see me, but hopefully all of you can hear me. But if you can't at any point, just put your hand up at the back, okay? So I'll be talking today very briefly about the wonderful Marble Hill, which is an example of an early Georgian English Palladian villa on the bank of the Thames in Twickenham. And its patron was a wonderful woman called Henrietta Howard, and she is a very interesting lady. Unfortunately, in the past, she's been identified only as the mistress of George II, but in truth, her story is much more full and interesting, and she was a sort of important figure at the Georgian court. She was very cultured, part of an important intellectual circle that numbered Alexander Pope and Swift and all those characters. And her house is one of the sort of lone remaining properties from that set of people who built villas along the Thames, just outside London, to get away from the hustle and bustle. She built it with money given to her by George II, and it was importantly put in trust so that her husband, who she was estranged from, couldn't get his hands on it because he was a bit of a gambler and much in debt. And so the £11,000 and some jewels and plate were given to her in 1723, and then very promptly in 1724 the house started being built. Now it's a very important year because this year it's the 300-year anniversary of the beginning of this building work, and it went on until, well, it'll be 2029 will be the end of that phase, so we'll be hopefully doing some very nice things over the coming years to celebrate that. So I'll just briefly be looking at the kind of how the curatorial approach here, because of course the house has gone through many different hands, and it was decided that we will take the line of the Henrietta Howard period. So when you go to Marble Hill, you'll experience the house as Henrietta Howard did. And that involves trying to flesh out the rooms into the early and mid 18th century furnishings. But a particular challenge and also choice that needed to be made is how to do this when you actually don't have many of the objects from that period. Now the images on the slide you see here are the only remaining items from the collection that did remain in the house in the 19th century, because although Henrietta Howard left in her will all the possessions to stay for her heirs as heirlooms, unfortunately in 1901 all of these possessions were sold off by the then owners, the Cunard family, and that was unfortunately just before an Act of Parliament saved the house for the nation as part of the protection of the view from Richmond Hill. So they got away, unfortunately, just before this moment. But these wonderful marble reliefs that are thought to have been gifted to Henrietta by the Earl of Pembroke remain in the hall today. And we actually think there were 6 of them, but 4 remain. And they depict the 4 seasons. So the ones that exist are Ceres, Bacchus, and the ones that we think got away were Flora and Vulcan, that represent the summer and winter. And there's also reliefs of Jupiter and Juno, the king and queen, and we suspect this might be a veiled reference to her associations with the king. And we do have some wonderful references in the records and archives referring to these objects. There's a bill that says, "To fitting the frames and fitting up busts in the hall, 1 day's work," and that's in 1750 by Brettingham. Moving on, so those are objects which remained. They didn't get away, they stayed in the space, but everything else went away, and we have managed to get a few of them to return. And one of the ways we did this, how do you find out what was there, is looking at inventories. And luckily, on her death in 1767, we have an inventory that lists all the objects that were in the house. Unfortunately, in those days, they obviously weren't such keen art historians, and they didn't describe really most of the pictures. But there are a few moments where we get a little bit of a description. So mostly it's 1 picture, 3 pictures of the wainscot, which is in the panelling. But in this little item, which you probably can't read from the distance, but just to summarise, there's one section that says, "In the great room, large pictures fixed in the wainscot, and 5 Roman views, landscapes." So that implies there are 3 big paintings and 5 Roman landscape images. And in the 1980s, the creators had great fun tracking these 5 Roman landscapes down, and bit by bit, piecemeal, returning them to their original positions in the space. So they're now set back into the panelling, which is really fantastic. You can see these capricci, as they were called, which are kind of fantasy landscapes. They are sort of paintings of parts of Rome, but they are not an accurate depiction of Rome. They're sort of a combination of wonderful views, and you can actually see the artists change their mind in some places. Panini painted out a Colosseum in one corner. He clearly thought it was overkill. The Trajan column picture there on the left is sort of very faintly in the background. You can see a Colosseum. It's rather fun. So those have returned, and that's really wonderful because they really make a big difference to that space in terms of reflecting the kind of cultural fascination with the classical world and Rome. Of course, the house is based on classical principles, but also many of Henrietta's contacts and acquaintances would have gone on a grand tour in its early stages, and in the 18th century, and unfortunately she didn't get to go away, so this was her way of travelling to far afield places from the comfort of her rather grand great room. The other 3 pictures that are referenced in that quote from the inventory, we've got a little bit more information in an 1890 sales particular, which says, "The centre panel containing very fine painting, the interior of the Vatican," and that's one of the pictures we just saw. "The other panel paintings upon the walls, within handsomely carved frames, are Rubens' Holy Family, full-length portraits of Charles II and Prince Rupert and James, and 4 views in Venice and Rome." So they got a little bit wrong. The identities of the pictures in these portraits are wrong, but what they meant were these Van Dycks, and we are very fortunate. It's wonderful when you have a photograph. This is before AI, so you can trust the images a little bit more. And the 2 images on the left show, it's amazing that they were snapped before they disappeared, the 2 Van Dycks that used to be in the space. And they are a copy of Lord John Stuart and his brother Lord Bernard Stuart by Van Dyck, and a copy of Charles I after Van Dyck. And they unfortunately were among the objects that were dispersed, but rather lovely touch is that previous curators have sourced other copies after Van Dyck in 1965. These two on the right were bought. And so one of them is Charles I and Prince Charles, so the future Charles II, after Van Dyck, and on the right, Henrietta Maria with Geoffrey Hudson after Van Dyck. And so those returned to the space along with the Paninis to kind of recreate what it would have been like in Henrietta's day. Unfortunately, the Rubens is one that got away. There is a similar one up in the Walker Art Gallery showing the Holy Family with Elizabeth and St John the Baptist. So you can go and visit that when you're up in Liverpool. The last two key objects that were in Henrietta's collection are two really fascinating pieces. One is a peacock table. Now, you see I've shown you an image of two peacock tables. The one on the right was wonderfully made during the recent redisplay project at the house, using authentic, original methods, so that we can return to the wonderful balanced Palladian symmetry of the space. There were actually 4 of these peacock tables, and it was thought for a time that they were by William Kent, but actually it's thought that maybe they were carved by James Richards, who also did the other interior carving in the space, which is really, really fine work. I've just included a drawing and another example of a similar kind of table. These ones have a wonderful peacock, which is the symbol of Juno. So yet again, another reference, classical reference of sort of female, powerful female figure. And also to mention there are some owls looking about too, and they symbolise Minerva. So lots of strong women in the room. And on the right is a Chinese lacquer screen, which is very interesting because we know for sure that it was commissioned by Henrietta Howard and made in China and then delivered back to England, because I've shown a detail here. There's evidence of her coat of arms, her shield, underneath the lacquer, and we didn't have the skill to make this kind of Chinese lacquer in the country at the time, so it had to be made in China. There's sort of apocryphal tales about how the peacock table was found in the hairdressers in Australia, and that the lacquer screen was made, I think, found in a sort of basement in Kensington somewhere. I need to fact check these, but they're quite nice stories, so it's wonderful that they've been restored to the room. So those are the things that maybe got away but came back again, and we have, reinstated into the space. But unfortunately, so much was sold that we had to find a new solution. So what we did was we looked at the inventories and lists and bought like for like, original antiques, very important, very expensive, wonderful pieces of furniture and art, but they are exactly what you would have had, even if it's not the original. And in some cases also we got loans from private and public collections. And also we have to think about, visitors coming to the space and not knowing much about the house or Henrietta Howard and how they'll understand the space. So we've done some a little bit anachronistic curating, where we've put this wonderful portrait of Henrietta Howard in the opening hall as a way of her welcoming visitors as they come into the house. And she wouldn't have done that. This portrait was commissioned by her friend Alexander Pope, and it's a wonderful picture that was actually commissioned just at the beginning of when Marble Hill was being built. And so it's wonderful to have the picture here, because that shows her expectant and excited about her new life at Marble Hill. And on the right is a picture of George II. Again, she didn't have one of these pictures downstairs. We do have a record of having a portrait of George II upstairs in the gallery though. So it's nice, again, in the first room when you're setting the scene and explaining her story, to have that portrait there. And that's also the reason why we have a bust of Alexander Pope in the room too now. And just to finish, these are a little selection of the other spaces at Marble Hill. And you can see that collections have been bought and put on loan and filled the spaces to make them warmer, and as if Henrietta Howard could maybe just walk into the room with you. And I was struck actually while walking around Pitzhanger earlier. I hadn't realised about the painted Chinese wallpaper here. And as you can see in one of these images, Henrietta Howard, again, ordered some painted Chinese wallpaper. We don't have an original now, we have a later version. but it's extremely beautiful and shows her love of chinoiserie, which was very fashionable at the time. And as you go through the house, you'll see a lot of wonderful Chinese porcelain that she collected. In fact, when they did the inventory, the person who was doing the inventory of the porcelain collection actually gave up and said, I didn't finish it, which is not what you're supposed to do when you do an inventory. So that shows how much she had. And we found little notes about the colours of the wall hangings. So the red wall hangings in the dressing room are replica, but again repeating what she had in the space. And the same with the lacquer cabinets and the carpets and the bed hangings. And then on top of this, we've tried to layer other storylines. So it's not just about a rich courtier. We found out a lot about her issues with hearing loss, for example. And so we've collaborated with deaf charities to do some interpretation about that. We've looked a little bit more into her experience of domestic abuse with a difficult husband, Charles Howard, and how she struggled through her life with that. And we brought out other stories such as lots of decolonial work, which we've done because the house has the earliest example of structural mahogany in the house. And mahogany is a material that is very associated with the colonial world at the time. So there's lots of threads running through, but we hope it's a very full experience and people won't mind that we only have 6 objects that were Henrietta's in the house. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that insight into both Henrietta's practice as a collector and the detective work that the current curators have been involved in. I think a similar story can be told about the beautiful manor house here, and our next speaker, Clare Gough, is the perfect person to tell it because she is the director of the Pitzhanger Manor Gallery. She's worked at other institutions previously, the Museum of the Home and the National Gallery, but I think it's an enormous achievement that she's overseen the pulling together of this magnificent collection of old and new that you see here. So over to you, Clare.
Thanks so much, Judith, and thanks so much, Emily, for a lovely start this evening. So yes, we're going to skip forward a few decades now to the very beginning of the 19th century, to Pitzhanger Manor, where, as Judith says, we are here tonight, but with a very different type of owner, John Soane. So John Soane came from very humble beginnings, the son of a bricklayer, but over his life really reaches the highest levels of Georgian society, finally being knighted by William IV in 1830. And he becomes one of Britain's most influential and possibly most innovative architects. And this, Pitzhanger, is his dream country home, built between the years of 1800 and 1804. In the country, because in those days Ealing was a little village in the country. London stopped at Marble Arch, so it was a village, and just behind me is the village green, but it was beyond were open fields, and we're sitting within what you're looking at out over the garden is his original parkland. And what you're seeing here in the picture that you've got up on the screen is a contemporaneous watercolour of Pitzhanger as it was in John Soane's day. Now, delightfully, we are today celebrating our 5th anniversary since the completion of the major conservation project to restore Pitzhanger to Soane's original designs. And I hope you'll be able to recognise the place that you have walked into tonight. So you probably came in through that arch right down at the bottom right-hand end of the picture and walked up past what was his kitchen block, now is now our gallery, but seen the villa that Soane built. And I'm delighted to say that it really is very, very similar to how it was in Soane's time. The only difference is that the kitchen block was when the house was acquired by the council in 1900, they turned it into a library, and they later knocked down the kitchen block and built a 1930s rather beautiful lending library on the site, and that is now the space that is our gallery. But otherwise, it's very, very similar. You can see the Serpentine Lake in the background. But Soane had many different aspirations for this, his dream country home. in part, it was essential to him as a man who'd really climbed up the ladder. He was very conscious as a self-employed man that you're only as good as your next job. So although at the age of 46, when he builds Pitzhanger, he's really made his name, not least as architect and surveyor of the Bank of England. He's always worried about when the next commission is going to come. So he builds this as a place to show off his architectural skills to his friends and he hopes future clients. So it becomes a great place of entertainment, so very much over the third glass of wine, he might be able to persuade you to commission from him another house. But it's also a place for him to show off his growing but very eclectic collection that ranges from classical artefacts to what were, in his day, contemporary art. But there's a third aspiration for him, and this is to build here at Pitzhanger what he sees as the dynastic home of the family of Soane architects. He's got a very, very strong image that his sons, he's got 2 young sons at the time, that they're going to be architects after him, their sons will be architects after them, and forevermore this will be known as the home of Soane architects. Now, tragically for him, this slightly sort of complicated notion doesn't come true. He falls out terribly badly with his sons, and this is an important part of the story of what happens to the collection. Because basically in 1810, so soon after he'd built this beautiful house, in 1810 his wife Eliza says to him, I can't live here anymore. I have to be back in our central London home, where I have society around me to distract me from the terrible way we have fallen out with our sons. So with great regret, and Soane is really, really sad to leave, with great regret in 1810, they pack up and move all of their collection with them back to their central London home, and he builds and expands his home there into 3 houses, and some of you may know it, in Lincoln's Inn Fields, what today is the Sir John Soane's Museum. So that's where all of Pitzhanger's collection is now. So we're in a very similar situation really to Marble Hill, is having the beautiful house and this interesting challenge of what do you do with the insides. What I'd like to do in this evening's talk is share with you the stories behind 3 key items of Soane's collection and how Soane designed the house around those amazing pieces, but also how he used the collection has influenced what we do today with Pitzhanger and what remains of the collection. But Emily mentioned the Grand Tour. Obviously the Grand Tour was an amazing opportunity for so many people, and Soane was unbelievably lucky. As a young man of very humble beginnings, he won a scholarship from the newly created Royal Academy that sent him off, paid for him to go off on a Grand Tour. And he went through France, arrived in Italy and spent his entire Grand Tour in Italy. But in Italy he was blown away by what he saw. Mainly the classical architecture that he loved exploring, but classical architecture, interestingly, not just Roman architecture, but very much also Greek architecture, because there was so much Greek architecture to be seen in Rome. So he spent time in Paestum, where there were Greek temples, went down to Sicily, with their fantastic Greek remains. So hugely influenced by this. And there's not a single piece of Soane's work after his Grand Tour that you can't pick out the classical references, and they're all over Pitzhanger. So I was absolutely delighted when Emily decided to show that one of those wonderful pictures of the Grand Tour, and on the left there you've got a picture from Marble Hill of the Arch of Constantine, which is at the bottom of the Forum, right beside the Colosseum. I think they may have rubbed out the Colosseum for this one as well. And guess what? It was the Arch of Constantine that inspired Soane when he was designing Pitzhanger. So if you look carefully, can you see, there's Pitzhanger on the right, can you see the links between the Arch of Constantine and the frontage of Pitzhanger? So Pitzhanger is just full of classical references. But I'd like to pick out to start with, one of the classical pieces in the collection that Soane collects. Soane definitely got the collecting bug while he was on that Grand Tour. And here is one of the most remarkable pieces in his collection. It's known as the Cawdor vase, only because I don't know why Cawdor gets a rating in this. It's obviously beautiful, 4th century BC Greek vase, found intact. How amazing is that? Found intact in Apulia. So at the bottom tip, the sort of booty bit of Italy. and it was made by a Greek colony based in Italy. And as you can see, it's in black, but with red terracotta figures dancing across it, telling the wonderful story, as so often happens on Greek vases. It's called the Cawdor vase only because Soane buys it from the collection of Baron Cawdor. He buys this in 1800, and 1800, of course, is the date that he has started work on Pitzhanger. So he's so excited about this key piece in his collection that he designs his breakfast room around the Cawdor vase. So there is a contemporaneous picture of the breakfast room. And if you look carefully, can you see on the left, on a plinth, there is the vase standing. It's a huge vase, I mean, it's about this size, it's really, really big. So he designs this whole room around the vase. And some of you, I know, went on a tour earlier, so just to give you a sense, that is how the room looks now, which is, you know, it really is based on that same drawing there. And he designs the room to show off the vase to best effect. So he puts one of his most trademark ceilings into this room, the canopy dome ceiling. This one's known as the handkerchief dome. And he places it against a faux marble of black marble to show off that vase to best effect. And the other thing he does, which is rather lovely, difficult to see in this illustration, but if I show you in the photograph, that was a photograph taken just after the restoration. It looks a tiny bit different now, different objects in it. But he's repeated in the room lots of different Greek symbols to be at home with the Cawdor vase. So can you see there's the Greek key sign on the mantelpiece, and then you've got caryatids in each of the corners of the domes. So a wonderful way in which he designs his home around that glorious piece in his collection. But Soane wasn't just interested in the classical. He also was fascinated in contemporary art. And his collection is so eclectic, it ranges literally from those early ancient Greek pieces right to the present day. So he is great mates with the artist J.M.W. Turner. They both get elected to the Royal Academy at about the same time. And he collects a couple of pieces of Turner's work, but also a couple of Canalettos, and also falls in love with Hogarth. And many of you may recognise this as one of the fabulous pieces in Hogarth's famous series, A Rake's Progress. Now, if you don't know the story, it's an amazing story of eight pictures that tell the story of a young man who, unfortunately for him, inherits too much wealth, fritters it away on prostitutes and gambling, and ends up in debtor's prison, and then ultimately dies a terrible death, having developed a venereal disease through his escapades. So it's a bit of a cautionary tale. Unfortunately, didn't have the effect it should have done on Soane's son. So Soane, terribly excited to hear this is coming up for auction, sends off Mrs. Soane and Liza Soane off to Christie's in 1802 to go and buy A Rake's Progress. And she's successful. They bring it home, they hang it in the small drawing room. And unfortunately, instead of putting his sons off, it seems to have inspired them, because George Soane ends up in a debtor's prison and a ménage à trois. So really, honestly, not the cautionary tale it was intended to be. But this room, Soane gets inspired and decides he's going to design a room to hold all of his contemporary art. So he wants to design a room to show it off to best effect. So he decides he's got to have a vivid colour to make it jump off the wall. So none of this white cube stuff that we have today. What does Soane do? He puts amazing red walls. Those are the incredible red walls. And then just to see, that's an image we had from when we borrowed A Rake's Progress back to Pitzhanger from the Soane Museum, and they look absolutely fabulous on the red walls. And the reason they look so amazing is that Hogarth has a splash of red in every single painting, and so they just jump off the walls. So here, just to give you a taste, is how the red walls look today. You may have seen them with Cinta Tantra's work. I'll come back in a minute to what we're hanging in Pitzhanger today. But as you can see, the Grand Tour has been a huge influence on Soane, and I wanted to talk about the third piece in the item, third piece in the collection I wanted to talk about is an amazing collection of prints called the Villa Negroni prints. And there's a fascinating story behind the Villa Negroni, very underknown, and I never really understand why it's so little known, but the year before Soane turns up in Rome on his Grand Tour, in 1777, huge excitement, they discover a new Roman villa and they excavate it. And this discovery is as exciting as the discovery of the villas at Pompeii and Herculaneum. It's in amazing condition, and what blows them away most of all is they've got incredible frescoes on all of the walls of this villa. And Soane is so lucky, when he turns up in 1778, he is allowed to clamber over the excavations and see it for real, just as well, because a terrible thing happens afterwards. Good news, somebody is so excited about it, they commission some pictures of the villa and then some prints. And what you can see hanging on the walls in the library here is prints of the Villa Negroni. Give you a picture of that's a bit of a close-up, and that's a real close-up of one of them. What is tragic is after Soane has seen them, some naughty aristocrat from Ireland buys the Villa Negronis, buys the frescoes, transports them back to England, but en route they get lost forever. Fortunately, we have the prints, so we look at those and say, we think they may have got lost in the French Revolution, which of course happened very shortly afterwards. So thank goodness we have the prints. But the thing is that the prints, or seeing the Villa Negroni, hugely inspired Soane and his work. And you can just see, just glancing at that, some of the influences, the shape that you have all around Pitzhanger, the colour of the walls, the colour of that red that we've just looked at, the faux marbling, the iconography of the gods and the goddesses. So a huge influence. But I just wanted to quickly tell you what happened next. So this influence of the Grand Tour was huge on Soane, as I've talked about, but he was really struck that by the time he builds Pitzhanger, 1800, we are at war with France. So tragically, young people could not go on their Grand Tour anymore because they couldn't get to Italy, because you had to get to Italy through France. And Soane was really struck by this because the Grand Tour was so influential for him. He felt terrible for his young apprentices. So he decided to use Pitzhanger and the displays that he had of his collection there, the cordial vase, other ancient pieces of antiquities, paintings like the Villa Negroni, to inspire his apprentices. So he gets them to sketch those. It's the best approximation that he can have for the experience he had when he was travelling in Rome and in the Campagna, to sketch the real things. And so in doing so, he sets up what is effectively the first ever school of architecture here at Pitzhanger. And we love that story of Pitzhanger, and we've very much taken that as our inspiration for what we do today. So in the same way that Soane inspired his apprentices, we try to use art, and usually contemporary art, hung against the classical that he, the historic surroundings that he installed. We use that to inspire our visitors. So we have embarked on a programme of contemporary art exhibitions. And so here is an example of some of the exhibitions that we've done in the main gallery. So you've got on the left there, you've got Anish Kapoor. On the far right, you've got Annie Morris. And in the middle, a wonderful American architect come printmaker called Erin O'Keefe. And in installing contemporary art in the old house and in the galleries, we try always to draw a link with Soane in some way. So with Anish Kapoor, it might be about colour or shape or form. But we always find that the contemporary art helps us look back at Soane's designs and see them in a new light. So I just wanted to finish on celebrating our latest acquisition, which is our first piece that we've acquired of contemporary art for Pitzhanger, which is Julian Opie's Curly Hair. You may have seen striding into the house. Absolutely, we borrowed this for a long time after an exhibition that we had of Julian Opie's work here at Pitzhanger, and we're absolutely thrilled that Julian Opie has let us acquire it from him at a really knocked out price, and so it will forevermore stride into Pitzhanger.
That was so fascinating, and all sorts of connections between our two properties are emerging already. And I think we'll be able to trace even more when we move to our third speaker, Tim Coram, who's going to be talking about a very different kind of collection, the collection of Richmond Borough. Let me introduce Tim before he starts talking. Now, Tim is also another very experienced speaker, and also he's devoted his life to the arts. He's worked in art services for 30 years, principally in museums and galleries. and he's worked a lot with festivals, so he's worked a lot with commissioning new art, and he's responsible now for a mixture of new and old art in the Richmond Arts Service. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Judith. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you, Emily and Claire. Really interesting. So I'm going to be talking about something a bit different. And I think one of the, just as a question that you might want to ponder, because one of the things I really like is the discussion and afterwards, is why do people collect? You know, what are collections for? Why? Because I think if you think about your own selves, you are probably collectors. You probably collect something. So I want you to just think about that as we're talking, and perhaps in this discussion afterwards, share what your collecting might be. So as Judith said, I'm sorry, getting a hand at the back. Can you hear me now? Okay. So as Judith said, I look after old and new. So the Richmond Borough Arts Collection is owned by the local authority, by Richmond, and it's housed in Alling's House Gallery, which I'm sure some of you will have visited and know. And the collection is entwined with the history of the gallery, but also increasingly it's entwined with the history and the people of Richmond. So the first thing I wanted to show you is two images, two works of art in the collection, which describe something of the continuity and change that you find when you get to any public collection. So the top image is one of the earliest paintings in the collection by Antonio Joly, amazing artist. He was mainly a theatrical designer, and there's something in the work, if you look at it closely, you can get the sense of a stage set. I really like it actually, because the size of Alling's house there is enormous. So you may not be able to make it out there, but it completely dwarfs Marble Hill, which. So I'm already getting the gloves out. So a really beautiful depiction of course, the famous protected view. The lower image is a lightbox piece by Emily Allchurch, who was commissioned to travel across the country to look at tourism as a contemporary concept, and this is the image that she presented. So I'm aware that you may not be able to see the detail of this, but because the view is protected, they're almost identical actually in terms of content. And what I wanted to draw out from this is how the collection at Richmond, and many local collections that are owned by public authorities, express continuity and change around place and community. And I think that's something that is really important, not just to the collection, but also to the local authority as an organisation that's there to develop and represent its people. So a little bit of history of the collection. So the collection was developed in a very different way to the collections that we talked about previously. There was a person behind the foundation of the collection, somebody called Nellie Ionides, who some of you will have heard of, an extraordinary character. She loved art almost as much as she loved poodles. There's some amazing photographs of her with poodles, and she's well known for creating a whole outfit based on the fur retrieved from poodles. So she loved poodles, but she loved art equally, and she amassed an extraordinary collection throughout the 20th century. And like many people, got to the age when she was thinking about her legacy and decided that actually there's nowhere else to place this. And so she approached the local authority and bequeathed the collection, along with some parts of Alling's house to the borough. And ever since then, the borough has had this collection. So what do you do with it? So that's another question. Imagine you receive this extraordinary collection of 400, 500 really interesting works of art. What do you do with it? Okay. So what the borough did, and don't forget this was in the 1960s, so it was at a time when a lot of local authorities were thinking about museums and galleries. There's massive development of local authority museums and galleries at this time, a real growth in them. And it's mainly because local authorities are interested in what we call placemaking today. Back in the day, it might have been called community development, or it might have been called about civic pride. And so the libraries department, as then, took this collection on and decided what was going to do with it. The founding collection was a beautiful collection, mainly of 18th and 19th century works, depicting extraordinary places around Twickenham and Richmond. And because of the place that it is, it also was comprised of some really significant artists and some very important works of art. And so what the local authority, what the libraries department, as it was then, decided to do was to pivot on how that collection was developed. So not concentrating on place, but concentrating on people. And so it began to collect new works which were about the people of the borough. And the painting that you're looking at here is the first acquisition that was made by the borough after it received the collection. So this is a lovely painting by Osman Kane, who wasn't born in the borough, but he came to live in the borough and taught in the borough. And he's often called, his work is often described as more Stanley Spencer than Stanley Spencer. That's bang on, isn't it? So if you look at it, it has that sort of magical feeling. I love it because not only is it a lovely painting, and it's a local scene. So those of you will recognise the churchyard in St Mary's. There's some lovely little things in it. So he's signed it on one of the gravestones. So his name is there on one of the gravestones, and it's a lovely moment because this is the marriage of this founding collection with this new way of thinking about collecting, how collections can represent communities. So I'm constantly, one of the things I was going to mention, which is a bit dry, but I'll mention it now because it's context, is that public collections are governed by different statutes. But we're covered by our professional body, the Museums Association's Code of Ethics, and we all know about that. And so there are certain things that we have to do when we're managing collections. And as a local authority, we're also governed by what's called the public sector equality agreements. And so we need to make sure that all of our collecting and collections support and develop equality in communities. And so this means that the use of the collection is really important. So how we use and develop the collection is as important as its history. So its future is really important to us. And so I wanted to give you an idea of how the collection is used. And so this image here is the most published of the works of art in the collection. So it's a lovely image of swan upping. So it's this, I'm not local, and some of you will know this better than I do, but there's this incredible ritual annually. The vintners and the dyers traverse up the river, ringing and recording swans. Does anybody know about this? Yeah, brilliant. So you can tell me more about it when we break, because I've never witnessed it myself, but this is a beautiful image of it. Again, you can see Orleans House on the right of the image as well, so it's nice to have that, but it's the most published image that we have. This is, I've been told by our volunteers, the most popular painting in the collection. Okay, so anecdotally, we haven't got perhaps this is something we should do, we haven't got a top 10 that we do officially, but this is the image that our volunteers and our participants say is the most popular. And it's a beautiful image of moonlit Twickenham. Can you see that? Can you see St Mary's on one side, and then you've got Eel Pie, and you've got this beautiful kind of lustre of the moon, and the main, like many of the paintings in our collection, the main focus of the collection is the river, that beautiful kind of lustre on the water. This artist, William Pether, was known in his day as Moonlight Pether. He was well known for these beautiful, and apparently people did come from all over the world to buy these moonlit paintings by William Pether. So this, anecdotally, is the most popular painting that we have. Both of the paintings I've shared with you come from the founding collection. But what I wanted to talk to you now is about how the collection is developing and how it's changing, and how the way that the collection develops reflects our communities and also art practice, changing art practice, in the way that Claire described how contemporary artists are also an important part of how the collections develop. So we have no money, just to let you know. So we have very, very little money as a local authority. We don't. Our acquisition budgets are zero. We have to fight for every penny that we can from donations and support. So we acquire very sparingly. What we tend to do is commission artists, and we commission to collect. So we commission artists. They work in a participatory way with our communities, and that then goes into the collection. But art is changing, and we need to reflect that in the collection. So what I'm showing you at the moment is the results of an exhibition that we did after lockdown. So just casting our mind back to 2020, 2021, when we came out of lockdown, we realised that there had been a huge amount of artistic production over that period of time, often not shared, often in individual people's houses and spaces. And so we offered people in Richmond and artists in Richmond a chance to show their work in the gallery. And so we showed about 200 works by artists from the borough. And this one was by, this is work by a man and his two sons, who, and the photograph shows the den that they built in the grounds of Orleans House Gallery during lockdown. And they wanted to present this as an example of a photograph, but also of a creative process that they've gone through. And this is a kind of symbolic of one of the 200. But how do you collect? How do you collect 200 works of art like that? It's impossible, isn't it? But it is possible today because we digitised all of them, and we recorded testimony from the people involved. So the collection now has within it an extraordinary record of people's experience during lockdown through art. And so I just wanted to share with you one way that the art collections are developing and changing. The other thing I wanted to mention was how the work that we do as a local authority collection links very much to the work of the local authority. Now sometimes people think that's really dull, but but before I lose you, it's all the things that we hold dear. And one of the things that we are working on at the moment is how the arts collection can represent the work of the local authority in its communities in response to the climate crisis that we're all facing. And so this work by Bryony Benjabat is a wall piece that's in Heath Road in Twickenham. It was created by Bryony working with school children in the local area who responded to the challenges, the concerns, the fears that generation have around climate change. They worked hard on it, they produced this work. It's now there for people to see in the public realm. We have recorded that process, we have documented it, so that then becomes part of our collection. So I'm just trying to give you an idea how the collection begins to move outside the organisation and represent more than just what's within the building. The final thing I wanted to mention was how collections, the public collections, become self-referential. Okay, so one of the things I think that's really important, and again, it's something that was picked up definitely by Claire and also by Emily, that the collection begins to develop a life of its own. Sometimes when I talk to people about collections, I describe them as it's more like gardening than curation, if I'm honest with you. You begin to create something, and what happens is the collection begins to take on a life of its own. You can't really manage it. It changes, particularly through members of the public coming in and adding to the stories associated with the collections. And this piece of work was created by a really interesting artist called Anish Kapoor. I said we don't have any money. We have a little bit of money that we bring in, so we have to work with emerging artists. And Himali is an extraordinary artist. And as a tip, I think she's going to be really important in the future. She came in and she wanted to work with our communities and also with our collection. I don't know if you know, but predominantly the arts collection in Orleans is an art collection. But we have an anomaly, which is the Burton collection. So we have this collection relating to this 19th century explorer, Richard Burton. And Himali was very interested in this collection because of all of the issues around decolonisation, the fact he was a man talking about his wife in very derogatory terms. She wanted to look at this collection in a different way. So she used the collections as a source for developing this piece of work, which is a really beautiful painting based on an image of Burton's study. And if you can see the tracing of the Nile, which Burton was very associated with, and also the Thames. And what Himali did was use this as the source for an immersive exhibition at the gallery, which extended beyond the gallery into the grounds, down to the Thames, had sound. It was a highly immersive exhibition. And what we did was we collected this one piece. And the way I think about this piece is it's a kernel. It's like a seed. It's not the entirety of Himali's ideas, it's not the entirety of the exhibition, but in this, it retains that DNA, that kernel of information which the exhibition was all about. And again, that's something that collections can do. So the final thing I'm going to say, because I know I'm keen to open up and hear about your collections as well, that would be great, is just to say that the gallery and the art service really firmly believe that the collection only exists because people visit and use it. So my invitation to you is Orleans House Galleries, just down the road. Please come and visit and see the collection in person.
Thank you to our wonderful speakers. And before I open to questions, and I'll ask a couple of questions myself, I just want to alert you to the next in our series. So we've been experimenting this season of London Luminaries. We've had a live performance, we're having this live event, but we return to our online offering in June, and we have our latest addition to the Luminaries community. We're having the William Morris Society will be talking about William Morris, which will be just fabulous. I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and I want to thank all three of our speakers and to Pitzhanger for hosting us, and to you for coming out when you could be staying at home watching the Tories being thrashed in the middle of the